Good afternoon, everyone. I think we'll go ahead and get started. I want to thank everybody for taking time out of your schedules to join us today to learn more about the GAMB endorsement. My name is Corey Brown. I am the program manager from Problem Gambling Network of Ohio, and I am joined today by Jill Smock, Executive Director of the Ohio Chemical Dependency Professionals Board. We are also joined by Derek Longmire, the Executive Director for Problem Gambling Network of Ohio, who will provide some additional support and also engage in the Q&A with us. So the purpose of today's session then is for us to provide knowledge on the GAMB endorsement and answer any questions that you may have. We'll cover what the GAMB is, why we think it's important, eligibility and requirements to obtain the GAMB, and then why we think you should get the GAMB. So first, what is the GAMB endorsement? It is in addition to the chemical dependency license or in addition to the scope of practice for counselors and social workers. So for those who are licensed by the Ohio Chemical Dependency Professionals Board, this is actually an attachment to the license. The GAMB is. If you are licensed through the counselor, social worker, or marriage family therapist board, this is just an addition to the scope of practice. So without this, folks are unable to provide treatment services for disordered gambling clients. So this allows anybody who's licensed through the Chemical Dependency Professionals Board and through the Counselor, Social Work, and Marriage Family Therapist Board to be able to provide those services. So the requirements are the same, it's just the end product is a bit different depending on what board you're licensed through. Why is it important? So since, in the last 10 years, we have seen continued expansion of gambling in Ohio. Currently, we have 4 casinos and 7 racinos that are in operation, and we continue to see more expansion of gambling. In 2020, there were, 2 sports betting bills that, were brought up in the House and in the Senate. And just a few days ago, Governor Mike DeWine said that he believes sports betting will be passed in 2021. So as gambling continues to expand, we know that more folks will be, they will be exposed to gambling. And then, by continuing to being exposed, we know that participation in gambling will also rise. As participation rises, then, increased prevalence of problem and disorder gambling arises as well. So we just, we need to have a competent and informed and trained workforce to be able to provide help to those who are impacted by the expansion of gambling. That includes, those who develop issues with gambling and also their families. Also, historically, Ohio was the birthplace of gambling treatment in the United States. Very proud of that and want to honor that history by continuing to build a competent and trained workforce to be able to provide services for those who need it in Ohio. So let's explore a little bit about eligibility.
All right. So, one of the, those of you that are counselors in the field of substance use disorder know that oftentimes those with a gambling disorder are also part of the clients that you might see. So with the licenses that the Chemical Dependency Board has, the LCDC 2-3, the independent license of the LICDC, or if you have the endorsement of the clinical supervisor, if you hold an active license, you are eligible to then apply for the GAMB endorsement. So again, you have to be able to get the GAMB endorsement, you have to have one of those licenses, and it has to be an active license.
And then similarly through the counselor, social worker, and marriage family therapist board, if you hold an LPC, an LPCC, LSW, LISW, and the supervision additions to those, and then also the marriage family therapist, MFT and IMFT, are all also eligible to add it to the scope of practice. Again, the requirements are the same, it's just the end product is a little bit different simply because there's not an endorsement through the counselor, social worker, and marriage family therapist board.
Right. And you brought up a good point too, Corey, is if you want to see the scope of practice for your license, of course, or for that gambling endorsement, you can actually see the scope of practice by going to our website, and our website is ocdp.ohio.gov. And you can actually go under laws and rules and you can find the scope of practice. So if if you're not familiar with what your scope would be, if you would get the endorsement, that's where you can look. You want to head to the next slide there. And so we already said one of the requirements of course, is one of those is a current license holder with our board. Then you also need to have 30 hours of gambling specific education. And Corey will let you know some great opportunities of where you can get that kind of one-stop shop. But you will go ahead, and if you look at the requirements, also going to our website, I just want to kind of let everybody know where you can find these things. Under certification and licensure, you're going to go to the drop down and you'll go and actually look under the endorsement requirements. So these will be on there as well. And so there's certain content areas. There's 4 different content areas: knowledge of gambling disorder, gambling counseling practice, special issues in gambling treatment, and professionalism in gambling treatment, where you're going to be getting that education. And on the website as well, there'll be a grid there for that information, and they'll also talk about some definitions. So you're needing to get those 30 hours before you apply for the endorsement. And then you can be awarded what we call that preliminary gambling endorsement. If you do not have 100 hours of supervision yet for gambling, you would be awarded the preliminary. And then what has to happen is you need to also get then those 100 hours before you get what we call a gambling renewable endorsement. And then what happens is every 2 years when you renew your license, and we'll talk about that, I think, a bit later, but you'll have to also get some hours in gambling, and then it automatically gets renewed when you renew your license there. So there is also a verification of supervision form that will also need to be filled out by your supervisor and sent in to get that renewable gambling endorsement. So as I said, all of those can be found on the website. I think sometimes it's kind of sometimes hard to navigate and find, but that's where you can find it. So Corey, you want to talk about some other ways that they can kind of get this education easily?
Yeah, absolutely. So as Jill said, PGNO really is that one-stop shop in which you can get all the education that is required for the GAMB endorsement. Not only are you getting the education to be able to get the GAMB endorsement, but you're also getting a quality education to prepare you for seeing gambling clients. So we offer our stage 1 training, which is kind of an introduction to gambling, problem gambling, and Ohio service system. In this training, there are you learn about risk factors and warning signs. There again, some connections between substance use disorder and gambling and mental health issues in gambling. You learn about the different folks who are involved in our service system, and start touching a little bit on treatment approaches and some introduction to some treatment approaches. This is a 12-hour training. Virtually, we offer it across 3 days, 4 hours a day for a total of 12 content hours. Generally, when we're in person, this would be a 2-day training for 6 hours a day for 12 hours. But this is generally where people will start when starting to gain some education in reference to gambling specific education. We also have stage 2, which follows the same format. Generally it'd be a 2-day training in person, but we have modified it to be a 3-day virtual training. This is a more clinically heavy training, applications and approaches in treating gambling disorder. This will start to look at the treatment approaches in individual and group therapy, such as cognitive behavioral therapy, motivational interviewing, and mindfulness. This has historically been led by Dr. Heather Chapman from the Cleveland VA. And We also will then have specialty topics trainings. Some of those this year include gambling in media, um, working the Gamblers Anonymous 12-step program, financial recovery for gambling clients, and looking at, again, specifically at drugs and alcohol and mental health, and where does gambling fit within that. Those are offered throughout the year as well. We have the Ohio Problem Gambling Conference. This is an annual conference. This year is the 18th annual Ohio Problem Gambling Conference. Will be held virtually throughout March. Generally, it's a 2-day conference in person that we have adapted to an 8-day conference throughout March. We're very excited to be able to offer so many continuing education hours for this year, generally about 13, 14 in person. This year, we're looking at 24 hours. The conference spans across the entire continuum of care. So you have the things that are directed toward, prevention, treatment, recovery, and also across Ohio's gambling support service system. So you'll have presentations that are led by national experts, presentations by prevention specialists, by clinicians, by researchers, and also, casino compliance officers as well. We also offer case presentations that are generally led by graduates of our fellowship program. These case presentations are a half an hour of education content that relates to the case. And then a clinician will present on screening and assessment and treatment and walk the audience through what a clinical encounter looks like. So these are just some of the options that we have in reference to education as it pertains to the GAMB endorsement. And then Jill kind of already touched on these things here, the supervision that is required, and also the hours of direct clinical experience that is required for the renewable GAM. And so I'm just going to kind of just touch on some of the things that we offer. One of those being the supervision and consultation virtual meetings. These are for folks who are currently engaging in some sort of direct service as it relates to gambling. So whether that be, and I'll talk a little bit on the next slide about some other avenues besides just face-to-face client interaction. However, if you're engaging in some sort of direct service as it relates to gambling, we have supervision and consultation meetings with Dr. Heather Chapman from the Cleveland VA to provide that supervision. So you'll submit a question and attend, and she'll address that question. It's a great opportunity. We just had one last Friday, and we had, I think, 8 people who attended, and it was just an incredible conversations to hear, to not only learn from Dr. Heather Chapman, but also to learn from peers as well. So it was an incredible opportunity to be involved in that. I want to kind of touch a little bit on some of the other opportunities for the clinical experience that's required. It can definitely be more than just seeing clients face-to-face. Screening and assessment, treatment planning, and also providing care for family members also kind of fit into that niche to be able to get direct clinical experience hours that are required for the GAM. And Jill, can you speak just for a moment on how these hours are logged or accounted for?
Certainly. There is not a specific form that requires you to log your clinical experience. Your supervisor, however, is going to sign off. So as I talked about on the website where you find that form, they're going to sign off and attest that you actually have received clinical supervision for the work that you've done, for the logging of those hours.
So let's address why we think you should get the GAM endorsement. So right now we have 35 GAM endorsed individuals in the state of Ohio. And I mean, if we just look at the difference between 4,300 folks who currently hold a license through the Chemical Dependency Professionals Board versus the number of GAMs, we can see a big disparity. Also, the number of GAMs versus, we have about 500 calls that come to the Ohio Problem Gambling Helpline every month. And we need more GAMs to be able to refer folks who need help too. Speaking of referrals, once you obtain the GAM, you can then fill out a referral agreement, and those who call the Ohio Problem Gambling Helpline can then be referred to your agency to get gambling treatment. That includes families as well. We also, yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to clarify one thing. I'm sorry, I should have waited till you were done with the slide here. So, but make sure there are two different forms. One is that you've actually done the clinical work. You've been in a compensated work position, getting that experience of those 100 hours that, again, a supervisor will sign off on. And then there's another form verifying that you've actually had the 4 hours that it talked about of the clinical supervision. So there are two different forms, but as I said, they are all right there. So I just want to make sure people didn't think it was just one form, because I think I kind of led people to believe it was just one. So,
sure.
All right. Sorry, John.
That's okay. So just to clarify, there's a form for supervision and a form for the direct clinical hours, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Also want to address the fact that we do have quite a number of service gaps in Ohio, where there are counties or multi-county areas that do not provide gambling treatment at this time. And so I think it's important to close those service gaps. That way, if you have a client who comes in, they don't get referred out either to the next county over or to, multiple counties away. Because we know that if folks are sent elsewhere, the likelihood of them following up and maybe even having to drive an hour plus to get the service is probably not as likely as if they can just get it where they are originally going to be seen. So it's very important to close those service gaps. That way we're able to, provide quality treatment across the state. Also, every board, every Adams board in Ohio receives gambling allocation dollars from the state. And what better way to use those gambling allocation dollars than to build our workforce and ensure that we're able to provide services to those who need it. So how do you maintain your endorsement? Jill kind of alluded to this. The requirements for renewal are a minimum of 6 hours of gambling specific education every 2 years, and you just renew it when you renew your license. So one quick question I had for you, Jill, just before we get to the question and answer session would be, when they are applying for this endorsement, do they do it in e-license as they would any other license or endorsement?
Yes, exactly. Everything is done online through that e-license system. It's also important to note that if you have the preliminary GAM, that you need to make sure by the time of your next renewal of your license that you have those 100 hours to be able to move to that renewable. So you just don't want to get, get the GAM prelim and then, hold off and not get those hours done and accomplished, so you can, by the time of your next renewal. So they give you that right time period, but that's it.
Because the preliminary GAM is not renewable and only good for the 2 years, then so it would have to be then moved toward the renewable GAM in order to still continue to see clients. I think another thing that I want to point out is just how accessible we all are, not only us at PGNO, but also those at the Chemical Dependency Professionals Board, and answering questions and making this process as seamless as possible. Obviously, we want to continue to build the workforce and want a competent and well-trained workforce in order to, address these issues in our state. So feel free to reach out to any of us. My contact information is on this slide here. So you can feel free to call me, email me, send me snail mail if you'd like. I'm working from home right now, so it might take me a little bit to get that, but yeah, reach out and we are happy to provide any information that we can to make this process easier for you. Great. Well, I want to thank everybody who is still on, who was in attendance today. I want to thank Jill Smock from the Chemical Dependency Professionals Board, and Derek as well for answering all these questions today that I might not have had the answer to. But yeah, definitely thank you everybody for attending today. And I look forward to seeing everybody on future trainings.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye now.